I will start with my definition of placemaking. Shared physical community that is, in its ideal form, life-giving, invites connection, and feelings of belonging. And that certainly comes out of the work that my organization does with now 143 communities in this country and about another 75 in 5 other countries, specifically around how do we make homelessness rare and brief. And so ironically and pointedly and critically in this conversation, how do we think about people who have been essentially told they have no place, have not been welcomed into the places in our communities that we are concerned with in our most aspirational moments about what makes for a good community and a good place. And what is, I think, important as far as understanding, to Dan's point, the process that we've learned with all of these communities that voluntarily join this problem-solving network called Built for Zero, is that the key to changing this equation for actually helping communities become places where there are places for everyone, and there is, frankly, a sense of agency and value that is provided to every member of the community, is that we have to start with the community as a system and why that's not working, and the whole process of making space, and take the focus well away from those who have been left out and create a process for community members, particularly the organizations that directly touch the issue, to focus on how to build a well-governed, reliable system for bringing everyone into a stable living situation. And key to this, and I think Dan hinted at it, was I think a process of deep knowing, which begins with helping these community teams, which usually begin with the Coalition of Not-for-Profits, the Housing Authority, the VA for veteran homelessness, the mayor's office, the county executive, helping that group function as a single team and be informed by in terms of what they need to do to make homelessness rare and brief, by people experiencing the problem, who must be known by name in real time. That this kind of recentering the person in this process is the key to the progress that's being made. We now have 46 communities in this country who are measurably and steadily reducing homelessness, even against our crazy and critical housing shortage. And also 14 of those communities that have reached what a measure that we have come to call functional zero, which means that the community has sustained an ability to stay ahead of the problem, has shifted more and more of its resources upstream, so that it's for subpopulations, either veterans and or chronically homeless individuals or families. And so those proof points are emerging that we really can get there when communities work in new ways. So one of the things that I'm going to sort of start with and then come back to at the end is governance. What is really different about this approach is the same thing that makes people's behavior, and this is, I could have picked almost anything. This is a group of folks working on an Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Any situation where people come together to protect their community against an imminent harm, that's what we have to model around some of these chronic challenges like homelessness. What we see is in these emergency moments, and at least in the United States, we have a very sophisticated and well-designed, even if FEMA ends up being a 4-letter word every time there's a natural disaster, there is an elegant system of collaboration that's been designed under this, the National Incident Command Structure, that scopes out who's in charge, there are clear hierarchies, decision rights, communications practices, procurement practices, ways that we rehearse in all of our communities to come together at times of crisis. And it's essentially borrowing a lot of these practices that has proven to be kind of the different way we work that actually makes this issue of almost designed exclusion something that we can overcome. I thought I'd talk about how this actually plays out based on a community. And I've chosen my community. I live in Concord, New Hampshire now. And not just to leave you with a sense of this is something that is happening, but how in 143 communities, but how to begin thinking about making it happen in the places you may live and work, because I'm not a long-term resident of Concord, but this is the reality of my community, and to share with you how we're thinking about how we turn this around. And I think this is just such a pointed headline, because in the picture, you also see that there's placemaking going on there. People who are living in encampments, and this happens to be one that bridged a private citizen's backyard and a railroad right-of-way. I mean, just a powerful witness to the instinct to create place and some sense of protection and community, even in the most dislocated and marginalized of situations. And what is striking in, I think, the way this manifests, and in so many places, is there is no secure place for people to actually exercise their agency to placemake. And so what we are doing is, in this voluntary committee we've put together in Concord, is trying to get the voluntary behavior around collaboration that ideally we can be working toward as communities and as a country, as just the way we do things. I think it was Tim who said earlier something to the effect, is like, maybe it's the way we come together and work. Well, that really is what we find is the key to this challenge. We now know by name that we have 316 individuals that we need to find housing for. We know what the dynamics of the issue are, how many new individuals tend to come into homelessness each month, and what the current capacity and ability of our community team to move people out of homelessness is. And we have to basically shut down inflow and accelerate outflow. And that is increasingly, as we know people by name, we are learning, all right, why are people becoming homeless? And how do we get those agencies and those systems, that information, better connected to this kind of committee's work as far as knowing how to shrink the system and prevent the kind of experience that this woman is having, but also it's part of our process in Concord, as is the case with all of the communities that we coach and support and bring this framework and coaching to, that we directly involve people experiencing the problem and telling us what's broken and what the system itself should be designed to actually function like. So I've given you a sense of what the new system can look like. Deep collaboration, more of a population level focus than a program level focus. That's the big leap, not simply perpetuating independent, well-intentioned, often very high quality programs operating in silos, but creating a voluntary governance structure to bring that all together with the intention of a measurable shift down to functional zero ultimately in terms of those experiencing homelessness. But it does finally beg the question of what are the alternative spaces? And so I thought I would essentially use this amazing group to pose a question and suggest to you something that is much on our mind, which is what are some simple ideas that are scalable that can help communities get to work on creating the new kinds of places of welcome, of belonging, of inclusion, that will actually change this phenomenon. This is not a problem we should have in the United States, and it's not a problem that any community can fail to make progress on if they're organized correctly. And so one of the things, and sort of inspired by where we are, the Richardson Hotel and here at the UB campus, it was formerly an almshouse. Every community in the country has public assets that are underutilized, whether it's, this is the Concord State Psychiatric Hospital, a few blocks from where I live, but like world's sloppiest looking parking lot, all sorts of unplanned space, underutilized buildings. New Hampshire has been smart in taking some of these old buildings and they've put state offices in there. So it's not like the whole campus is underutilized. But wherever you go, particularly in the Northeast and the Midwest, but frankly, in any part of the country, you'll find underutilized public buildings and publicly owned lands. These are the places where we could really get to work. That we have so much more control over what happens zoning wise, what happens in terms of public dollars spent on infrastructure. And so this idea really interests us. And so I'd be curious, again, in the spirit of simplicity, we can basically hold our head in our hands with weariness about the kinds of zoning and land use and political barriers to development. But why is it that other earlier generations were able to build these kinds of institutions that actually triggered a new moral imagination, whether libraries across the country, land grant colleges, a whole generation of beautifully designed psychiatric institutions as the introduction of moral therapy as opposed to cruelty. Like, we know how to build stuff. I think it's really much more of a decision and an igniting of moral imagination that's the barrier. And then just to extend the theme, in all of these cases, two more partially used New Hampshire institutions. This is former TB sanitarium, the juvenile justice facility that they're closing down. The other thing from a political standpoint, these are already facilities that are they've been, neighborhoods have grown around them, and you do not have the same kind of challenge of introducing kind of new uses. But what they also afford, we think, and many people have touched on it, we just need better ways of thinking about density and experimenting with density and what are the new kind of patterns of development and forms of housing and other uses. And these are also places, given kind of the sprawling footprints that many have, even as I'm looking around the campus here, where you can do some of the kind of experimenting that you find in other cities that may, especially internationally, where there are different assumptions about private space, different kind of approaches to imagining what per house zoning should look like, and the kinds of really attractive placemaking opportunities that involve a new way of thinking about design. These large public assets and these publicly owned spaces, could be the kinds of opportunity, could present the kinds of opportunities that could lead to yet another level of imagining of where are there potential public spaces and opportunities for density that could enhance neighborhoods in the case of properties in private control. And I think it's interesting, and here's yet another view from Concord. It's a little hard to see, but I think we find in our older cities that this kind of imagination about how we make space for people, how we, kind of use our assets differently, how we imagine that we start with the principle of making space for everyone, and then we worry about some of the land use issues as opposed to one preceding the other. All over Concord and many parts of New England and New York, you have these back houses and just this notion of how dense, how the degrees of privacy, what's attractive, what's sustainable. How do we again, reignite our imaginations around what we can do with our public assets and what we can inspire in terms of more dense and creative use of privately owned spaces, middles of blocks, for example, here, with the kind of models that will, frankly, be needed for us to make decent places from a living and a community standpoint available to all. And so I want to basically wrap up with what we've learned about governance, because it just seems, as we all scratch our heads about how we're going to meet the housing needs of the country, how we're going to solve problems of every sort in our communities, how we're going to overcome division to get anything done. This is what we've learned is really at the core of how we're helping communities move forward and get measurable, sustainable reductions in homelessness against a difficult political tide, shortage of housing, all sorts of rules and bureaucratic barriers that just really frustrate a clear path to solving the problem. We're finding that the thing that matters most is getting folks together around a shared aim. Again, as in the case of an emergency, if 316 people had become homeless in Concord last week because of a flood, a whole different system would kick in. You'd have, in terms of emergency management, the only things that matter are, saving lives and property. So a really clear shared aim. So if you can create that in a kind of a normative way around our shared challenges, that seems to be the key. But this nimble command center team, folks working toward a common goal, knowing very specifically by name, taking the anonymity out of this problem or any problem, I think, just having a clear menu of things that have worked elsewhere, and then being flexible in terms of everything being on the table in order to get you to your goal. And so that's my contribution on placemaking, and really looking forward to the rest of our panel's comments. Thank you.